In this video, we will continue on with our example of a WT form that is within Flask, within Python, and we started adding a validator. So the first validator we added was an input required. And in this example here, we're going to add a length validator. So we're going to insist that a given text input have a particular length be sort of more than 3 and less than 20, something like that. Okay, so there is the app valid length. That is the sort of Flask Python that's going to be handling the routes. There's going to be the form valid length Python. That's going to be where we define our form elements and where we're going to say that we're going to what validators we're going to have. Then we're going to have the two HTMLs. They're going to be in the templates folder. So we're going to use a render template to get those. The first one will have the form, and then the second one will handle the data passed over to the form if the data survives our validation. Both of the HTMLs work out of the same layout, which is also HTML, and then that layout calls a style sheet. Okay, so I've done a number of these. I usually run from the terminal, the command line, and I've done a number of that already. So I'm all ready to do Flask run. So let's do that, enter that. Here is my sort of virtual web server up. And now this name is required. So if I don't put anything in all, I get the, I don't get the message here that I would in the other fields. I would. So let me put in something here and then take something out here. So just the requirement says, please fill out this field. But I've added here not only that they need to fill it out, but that it needs to be more than 3 or more characters and less than 20. Okay, so if I just put in something, G, it's no longer the input required. I'm moving to a new validator, the length validator. And I'm getting a message here, please lengthen this. So GE, I tried to enter it, and it's please lengthen this text to 3 characters or more. You are currently using 2 characters. So I'm going to show you that I've written a error message, and this isn't it. So the browser itself is handling this. So that I'll show you the message I wrote, and then in the past I have seen like the message I write and the styling I give it appear, but not now. So this is sort of increasingly things are sort of handled by the browser, but let's also look behind the scenes, view the page source. Here is the name input. That's the one that we have changed. Here's the required attribute. Just says you have to have something in there. And then here's a min length of 3. And as we pass it a size of 30, that's going to be sort of irrelevant. That sort of determines maybe how big the box is. But here's a max length of 20. So we saw the 3. If I put in 1 letter, 2 letters, I got it yelled at. Now let's look at the max length. So let me put in Fred, 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 and now I'm typing and getting nothing. So it won't even let me type past the 20 characters. And then I can enter that. Fred, 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 Fred. Okay. So that's what we've gotten out of this, a length validator. If it was too short, if it was not 3, we got it was yelling at us if we tried to hit enter, and we had a maximum length validator, and it's not even allowing us to type beyond there, at least this, which is edge. Okay. So how did we get here? Okay, so this is uh, the the routing page. The routing page hasn't changed. Here's one part where there's a possible change, and I don't think this change is even sort of required yet. There's a form is submitted and a form dot valid on submit. And previously I've been using is submitted, and I switched over to valid on submit, but they both, I think it works either way because it's still, because these are validations that the currently the browsers are smart enough to handle, then I don't think this distinction between is submitted and valid on submit is that different. So it sort of stays on the page if it's in violation, whereas uh, valid on submit means if it got all the way over here and then we realized it was bad, then we send it over back to the form. But there is sometimes a distinction between is submitted and valid on submit, but we're not seeing it yet. Okay, so that's the only change here in the um, routing stage of are we using form is submitted or form valid on submit. I did move on to valid on submit. I like to keep both of them available. Sometimes I get sometimes I'm getting an error on valid on submit and I can't quite figure it out. And then I like to have this other code that is submitted, which is a little bit more forgiving, sitting there. So I like to keep them both there. This one's a little stricter, this one's a little looser, but right now they seem to be acting pretty similarly. Here is the WTF. So we had up to this, we're working with validators now. So we had the input required previously. We were adding the length, and I'm only adding the length to that name field. So here is so the name is a string field. It's got a label of name, and we're adding a validator. As we said the previous time, the validators argument here is a list. You can have multiple validators. And we have a input required validator. And it has a message that says you must enter a name. We're not seeing that message because the browser is handling it. So there is an opportunity for us to write our own message. But if the browser handles that particular validation, it sort of like overrules you. So we're not seeing my message for either of these, validator, error messages. But so the browser was handling it. The browser had its own message. But I can write a message, and if the browser doesn't have one, then my message can take over. Okay, so here's the new validator in the list of validators, the length validator. I had to add that here in the imports, of course. I'm specifying a minimum length of 3. We saw that if I had less than 3 characters, it was yelling at me. If I had a maximum, it didn't even allow me to go over the maximum of 20. And then here was the message, but I didn't see the message. The browser was producing its own message. I haven't tried this with a bunch of different browsers that may have an effect. The submit button, the select, the drop-down select for the languages, the drop-down select for the colors, the integer field for the hours, the decimal field for the wage, those are all from before. So the new thing is the length validator on the name. On the form, and again, this is a thing that I've needed in the past and don't seem to need now because I guess browser evolution. I made a place on the form to display the error. So I made a span and gave it a class error, and I gave that that class some styling in my CSS. Um, so I could get the form.name.errors, and those would display those messages. And if there were multiple messages, multiple errors, I was joining them together with a vertical bar. But we didn't see that because the browser had its own. So that was the change here in the form, and there was no change in the handler. So the handler, this is all, the validation is all about making sure the information that gets to the handler is correct and does so there are no needed changes in the handler. Okay, that's what I wanted to show you, to add a length validator. So the main thing here was the change in the form and adding validators. Name had a validators argument. It was a list. I've added an element to that list that was of the type length. It had a minimum of 3, a maximum of 20. It had a message. We never get to see those messages because the browser was handling it. Here's what the HTML does. It added a max length of 20, a min length of 3. That was the effect of that. And then the browser was sort of handling it from there. In the routes, I switched from is submitted to valid on submit, but I don't think that was an important distinction here in this. And in the HTML, I added a place to display the error with some styling. So I had some styling. I'll show you the styling even though it doesn't get used. So here's the simple CSS, and I added some dot error, some class. Dot refers to class. It's styling the error messages, and I made them sort of salmon and red. But because the browser was handling it, we never did see that. Okay, that's what I had to show you in this one. Thanks for your attention.